Chapter 2. The Swamp. The sun kissed the horizon, casting elongated shadows from the swamp canopy over Cyrus's head. He trudged through the knee-high swamp water, each step sending muddy sediment swirling around his sloshing boots. A loud smack echoed off the water, provoking a multitude of creatures to writhe and dive into the murky depths. I turned to Burke, a hulk of a man, frantically swatting at the swarm of insects feasting on his sweaty skin. The humidity caused the heat to cling to our skins. With his free hand, he frantically swatted at the elusive insect, its movements embodying a grace and elusiveness he could barely comprehend. His other hand clutched the medical supplies package tightly against his shoulder. "At this rate," I remarked, a note of resigned humor in my voice, "you'll be giving the flies more than just a fleeting taste." "These blasted flies!" he shouted, furiously swatting at the air. Sweat trickled down his brow, his irritation palpable. "Why couldn't Box do this job?" he demanded, his voice cracking with wariness and anger. "They'd choke on his damn oil before they'd get a taste for it." The words gave me an idea. I smirked and said, "Next time, perhaps we could cover ourselves in oil. I mean, why not make this challenge even messier?" My voice dripped with sarcasm. Besides, Box would probably lose track of the supplies, and with nothing to trade, we'd have to call this swamp our new home. I turned to look at Burke and grinned, adding, "Then you'd be the local fly buffet for life." Burke's expression conveyed a strange mix of weariness and determination. He glanced down, contemplating his next move. Slowly, he bent and scooped up a handful of mud, slapping it onto his neck and face with deliberate motions. His grimace deepened as the cold, wet substance spread across his skin, but he endured the discomfort. A moment later, he exhaled in relief, grateful that the persistent bugs were no longer a nuisance. A wild chuckle burst from my lips, a conflicting blend of revulsion and admiration swirling within me. Despite the sweltering heat, I had opted for my long coat, its fabric a stifling shield against the relentless assault of pesky insects. I resumed my trek through the muck of the swamp, each step a squelching reminder of my grim surroundings. Out of the corner of my eye, a sudden ripple disturbed the stagnant water, seizing my attention. I halted abruptly, turning sharply to get a better view. The source of the disturbance remained hidden beneath the murky surface. Burke froze beside me, his eyes darting between my tense figure and the ominous spot I was fixated on. "Wah!" he began, before I raised a hand, cutting off his questioning. I pointed urgently to a shadowy figure lurking just beneath the surface, its form distorted by the shimmering water. The creature's bulk loomed menacingly at the front, a long oval shape tapering into a narrow, serpentine limb that trailed behind like a tail. It undulated in slow, sinuous patterns, propelling the creature forward stealthily, barely disturbing the surface to maintain its concealment. As it drew near, I held my breath, praying our statuesque stillness wouldn't betray us. Just as it passed Burke, he pivoted slowly, eyes locked on its every move. My muscles tightened at his daring act, and the abrupt motion made the shadowy figure hesitate. In an instant, a tail whipped through the water, hurling the creature into a frenzied spin. Suddenly, it was behind us. A vice-like grip clamped onto my shin, and with a violent jerk, I was yanked off my feet. Burke's shout echoed in my ears before everything was swallowed by the murky depths of swamp water. A desperate gasp for air was choked off by the rancid taste of spoiled eggs and decaying leaves as the swamp water flooded my mouth. I clawed desperately for my sidearm, but my fingers met only the cold, unyielding leather of an empty holster. The creature's grip tightened, yanking me with a force that sent waves of agony up my leg. Pain exploded with every jarring thrash, each one met my futile attempts to suppress it. Suddenly, a muffled thump and a sharp sizzle erupted beside me, cutting through the chaos. The agony in my leg vanished as the torrent ceased. A powerful hand seized the collar of my drenched coat, and my chest convulsed violently, expelling water from my beleaguered lungs. My eyes locked onto Burke's imposing figure as he hauled me upward, his strength the only thing keeping me from collapsing completely. His resonant voice sliced through the clamor. "Captain," he exclaimed, his tone laced with urgency. "You're all right," he added, his words brimming with heartfelt relief. My senses finally stabilized, the blurry vision clearing as Burke's rugged face came into sharp focus. My trembling hands clung to his strong, weathered arms to steady myself. He thumped my back with firm, reassuring pats while I hacked up the last of the cold, brackish water. The creature was still thrashing wildly in the water, a black burn mark smoldering on its back, splitting the jagged dorsal fin. Burke unholstered my laser musket from his belt, handing it to me with swift urgency. My fingers wrapped around the weapon with practiced ease. I blasted 2 rounds from my 4-cartridge laser musket into the loathsome, writhing water creature. Each gunshot echoed with a resounding finality, splashing its murky essence into the air like ink spreading in water. It let out a gurgled wail before its lifeless body rolled over, exposing its underbelly, finally liberated from its cursed existence. "Right bastard," I crowed, victorious and breathless, savoring the sweet, acrid scent of plasma vapors in triumph. Unexpectedly, it was Burke who bent down and hesitated for a moment before gripping the creature by the tail. As he hoisted it up, the monstrous catfish emerged, glistening under the sunlight. Its thick, armored scales and muscular flanks hinted at its formidable nature. Burke's laughter, a familiar infectious sound, echoed off the surrounding trees. "Look at this marvel," he exclaimed, a glint of triumph in his eyes. "Nature has a way of providing when we least expect it." Dragging the creature toward a weathered stump, he carefully laid down the medical supplies. With both hands, he hoisted the massive beast, its scales shimmering under the dim light. It was as long as Burke was tall, a true leviathan of the depths. Withdrawing a gleaming knife from his belt, he plunged the steel deep into the creature's side, carving out thick, succulent steaks of fish meat. He then wrapped them in a sturdy cloth, fashioning a sling to drape across his back. We resumed our march toward our destination, the dim light of dusk casting elongated shadows around us. Our watchful eyes scanned the darkening landscape as the final ray of sunlight disappeared beneath the horizon, plunging the world into a cloak of night. A symphony of insects erupted into a chorus of chirps, their calls weaving together and echoing across the swamp. "Captain," Burke's voice wavered through the cloak of night, each syllable heavy with unspoken certainties. "Yeah, big guy," I answered. "I see a light to our right," his answer carrying a hint of hope. Sure enough, I too saw the light. It wasn't just any light, but the unmistakable brilliance of artificial illumination. Its white hue resembled a distant star, guiding us with its inviting glow. Suspended from a post over a dock just above the water's shimmering surface, it led the way to a shack constructed from rustic local woods and patched metal framework. Though it wasn't extravagant, it offered refuge far preferable to the swamp we were leaving behind. The dock was a haphazard row of weathered wooden boards, each end mismatched and uneven. Whoever built it clearly prioritized function over aesthetics, though its rugged appearance belied its sturdy structure. The shack stood above the water on wooden pillars that plunged into the murky depths below, resolute and unwavering. Closed shutters angled downward, making it nearly impossible to glimpse inside. I glanced back over my shoulder at Burke, who was expertly concealed in the shadows of the bushes. If I hadn't known his exact hiding spot, even my trained eyes would have missed him. I signaled him over as I slowly emerged from the water and onto the dock. Each step was careful and deliberate, muffling the sound of the water sloshing around me. I paused, letting the water drain from my boots, hoping the dripping would quiet to a mere whisper. Just then, a resounding thump echoed through the dock as Burke collapsed under the weight of the medical supplies. His arms trembled, muscles quivering from exhaustion. Putting a finger to my lips, I silently approached him. Straining with effort, I attempted to hoist his large frame. He sighed, taking over the final push to stand on his own. "Sorry," he whispered, his voice heavy with fatigue. "I tried, but my strength gave out at the last minute." I carefully picked off the prickly, spiked seeds clinging to his back, remnants left behind by the swamp's tenacious flora that turned any passing creature into unwitting carriers. "Hold off on the apologies," I said, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You've done more than enough. Take a breather. Stay here, all right? I'm going to check out that shed." Entering the light, I pressed myself against the shed wall, heart pounding at the thrill of being undetected. Inch by inch, I nudged the shutter blinds upward. They creaked quietly, their wooden slats resisting with a whisper. Cool air brushed over my hand as I peered inside. The walls were lined with tools crafted from local plants, each one telling a story of ingenuity. In the corner, a box stood with conduits snaking up the wall and across the ceiling, branching out like veins. A soft hum resonated from within it, a generator, quietly alive with potential. On the far side of the shack, a figure sat with their back to me, shrouded in an unfamiliar gray suit that hung loosely, held up by straps over their shoulders. One strap had slipped, allowing the eerie glow of a datapad to spill into the darkness. I froze, retreating slightly to avoid being noticed. I glanced back at Burke, his eyes shining with a piercing curiosity. He moved his hands gracefully, our practiced gestures forming the words safe and move. I interpreted it as a request to advance to my position. With a firm hand signal, I responded negative, stationary. Slipping past the window, I pressed my back against the far side of the wall. My eyes darted around, scouting the perimeter for any potential threats. The silence felt heavy, but we seemed to be alone with the figure in the shack. As I rounded the corner, a steel door loomed ahead, its metallic frame hinting at an almost impenetrable barrier. I glanced over my shoulder at Burke, my fingers fluttering with the signal for visuals, one person, non-threat. His eyes met mine, and he responded with a fluid motion, his acknowledgement clear in the practiced precision of his hand. Move was his silent command, the brevity of his gesture conveying urgency. I echoed his signal, adding a swift nod to confirm. No sooner had I done so than Burke's muscular frame bent to lift the heavy supplies, his every movement smooth and deliberate as he advanced toward my position. As Burke inched nearer, a floorboard groaned in protest, its cry slicing through the silence. Inside, the figure shifted, sensing our intrusion. "Ello?" A frail, quivering voice called out, laced with years of hardship. Is Sumam Dar?" I hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. Against my better judgment, I stammered, I'm sorry. We thought no one was home." "Better identifies you's self," the frail voice echoed with unexpected authority. The familiar, chilling sound of an energy cartridge sliding into the musket's action ended with a click, followed by a high-pitched whine as the weapon charged ominously. "Just lost travelers in need of help," I replied swiftly, my heart pounding as I realized that my next words could seal our fate. The figure approached the door, the lock sliding upward before falling into place with a resounding clunk. The door hinges squealed, their protest echoing off the water's surface, sending the creatures around the shack scurrying into the murky depths with frantic splashes and bloops. "Travelers," the frail voice questioned, "how many's of you's Dar are?" "Just my colleague and I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "We mean no harm, just looking for a way out of the swamp. We'll be on our way." The voice laughed. "Travelers into night swamps." A soft cough interrupted the laughter. "Dis here swamp is no places for travelers, no." The voice hesitant on the words. "Me does no think yous be travelers. No, not even bandits be brave enough for dem here waters." There was no getting past this stranger with lies. "Well, we're certainly no bandits," I replied, a hint of laughter coloring my voice. "My colleague and I crash-landed our ship miles to the south of here. We're in desperate need of aid." "Crash-landed," the voice questioned. "How does one crash lands in dis here swamp?" It added, perplexed by the very idea that someone would land in a swamp by any means. "Our navigation failed on entry to the planet," I stammer, grasping for words. We tried to correct it, but it was too late." Practiced lies wove a calm, steady tone into my voice, cloaking my deception in a veil of sincerity. The truth was partly on our side. Our navigation had failed, and despite our desperate efforts to fix it, we lost control over our descent. "Well, I suppose you are armed," the frail voice questioned. "Yes, we are armed," I replied. "First shows of good faith," the voice continued. "How's bouts one of you steps out this way, ears back to's meh, hands empty. Lets me get a goods look at yous." With a firm grip, I handed Burke my laser musket. His eyes widened as he glanced at it, then back at me. "Captain," he murmured, a hint of doubt in his voice, "you sure this is a good idea?" Peeling off my long coat, I draped it over his shoulder. "Burke, you've doused yourself in foul-smelling swamp mud," I said, raising my hands and stepping back. "Our choices are spending the night in the swamp or facing an old person with a musket." With a shrug, I added, "I've already been fish bait once. I'll take my chances with the stranger over any number of swamp creatures any day. Rounding the corner with my back to the stranger, I came to a stop just far enough to chance a dive back to cover behind the wall. "You's sure ear a traveler," the frail voice spoke. "Well, seeing as you spoke the truths, you's go aheads and turns rounds, so I's get a good looks at you's." As I turned, my eyes drifted to an elderly figure, his bearing slightly stooped with age. Draped in a suit that enveloped him from neck to toe, his baggy overalls were cinched by wide straps threaded through sturdy buckles. His weathered complexion told tales of a lifetime of labor, and his thinning white hair cascaded to his shoulders. Atop his brow rested a pair of electronic optics, reminiscent of antiquated goggles, hinting at a blend of the old and the new. "No Republic Corps or Union markings," the elderly man spoke. "At least use not any of does bastards." I was beginning to like this old man. With a hearty chuckle, I added, "I'd be 6 feet under before you ever caught me dead wearing either of those monstrosities on my attire." His smile showed a bit of hope as he lowered his weapon. "All right, now yours friend turn," he said. "Time for Dems to step out empty-handed." With my hands still raised, I signaled to Burke to comply with the man's commands. Reluctantly, Burke let our weapons and the medical supplies clatter to the dock at his feet. Slowly he stepped out, his arms raised, his empty hands a stark testament to our vulnerability. I could see the man's eyes widen and his jaw slightly drop, a look of pure astonishment plastered across his face at the sight of Burke's towering figure. "Wait a minute, you's not mentioned this ear colleague is a giant," his voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. "Be no use for this ear musket of mine's." The old man's attention snapped to a chilling screech echoing from the depths of the night-shrouded swamp. He lowered his laser musket, its barrel still pointed at the door. "Best you boys get inside now," he murmured, his eyes never leaving the darkness. Burke hastily grabbed our weapons and supplies, and I snatched my coat before following him inside. The elderly man trailed in behind us, his gaze still fixed on the unseen menace outside. Inside the shack, the atmosphere was a refreshing contrast, with a cool breeze whispering through the gaps in the weathered planks, providing a welcome relief from the oppressive heat of the surrounding swamp. "What was that noise?" Burke questioned the old man. Securing the door, the old man rammed the heavy lock into place, its resounding thud echoing ominously against the frame. His anxious eyes darted around the room. Whatever it was, he was determined to keep it from breaking through. He extended a bony finger towards the interface panel, delicately tapping a sequence of buttons. The lights gradually dimmed, transforming into a gentle hue reminiscent of a serene golden sunset. "Naga," he answered to Burke's questioning. "Night pack? Must be huntin' some din big if day be dis far norths," the old man murmured, his voice a raspy whisper as he shuffled from window to window, fastening the creaky wooden shutters. We stood frozen in the center of the room, clutching our belongings tightly. As the elderly man completed his urgent task, he finally turned to us, his eyes filled with a glimmer of reassurance. "No needs to worry," he said, his voice weathered but firm. "Dizzer shack will keeps them out." He grabbed a stool and an old barrel from beside the table. "Air," he said, brushing the dust off the barrel, "sits down and rests yous up." Burke positioned our weapons deliberately on the table, ensuring they were just out of our grasp. He then carefully set the medical supplies on the floor and subtly slid them under the table, almost as if emphasizing their secondary importance. I observed the old man scrutinizing our modest cargo box, his gnarled fingers twitching as if to measure its worth. His eyes, clouded with age, shifted back to Burke, his brows knitting together in puzzlement. "Medical supplies," I answered his unspoken curiosity, my voice steady. We were heading to Countess Isadora Ravenshadow's lands, hoping to trade them for spare parts. I carefully revealed just enough truth to make my story plausible, deliberately omitting the details that could raise suspicion. He strode over to a cabinet hanging precariously on the wall, its door creaking open to reveal a stockpile of resources crammed inside. He pulled out 2 containers labeled hydration packs, their surfaces cold and smooth to the touch. "Air," he said, thrusting strange containers into our hands. Burke and I stared at them, baffled by the unfamiliar contraptions. "Yous really are travelers," the old man chuckled, his eyes twinkling with amusement, before demonstrating how to reveal a synthetic nipple with a simple twist of the lid. With a mischievous grin, Burke eagerly latched onto the bottle, its nipple vanishing into his mouth in an instant. He sucked with fervor, the cool, refreshing liquid gushing forth, electrifying his senses. Each swallow was an awakening, quenching a thirst he hadn't realized was a desperate craving until now. I followed suit, drawing on the cool liquid from within the bottle. Its flavor was a burst of sweetness and crisp clarity, a delight reminiscent of a long-extinct fruit from my home world. I paused to savor the moment, relishing not just the taste, but also the invigorating chill that flowed through my senses. The old man finally sat down in the chair from which I saw him first resting when I peeked through his blinds. The swamp life from outside the shack had returned to its flurry of activity. The occasional screeches in the distance drew my attention. Breaking the brief silence between us, the elderly man spoke again, his voice rough with age. "Name's Willard, but most call me Hermit." He reached out with gnarled fingers, pulling the datapad from the table. Slowly, with a deliberate precision, he began to input commands. The soft glow of the screen illuminated his weathered face as a detailed map of the local area emerged. He handed it over to me, his eyes twinkling with a hint of hidden knowledge. "There's only one way between air and the mainland," he said, his finger tracing a jagged line on the digital map. "I can guide you through it to the nearest town." He paused, his eyes meeting my own with a mix of concern and resignation. "But don't be expecting a warm's welcome," he added, leaning back in his chair with a heavy sigh. "Dem folks aren't fond of outsiders." The once distant screeches now pierced the night, no longer isolated but multiplied into a menacing trio that encircled the shack at a distance. Heart pounding, the old man bolted to the control panel and killed the lights, plunging the shack into an oppressive darkness. The commotion outside the shack was violent, the water crashing and thrashing against the structure, silencing even the persistent hum of insects. The only noise was the spine-chilling groans and creaks of the tree branches as they swayed ominously. Then, an oppressive silence. The three of us froze, every muscle tense, with only the heavy, labored breathing of Burke breaking the stillness. I reached out blindly, my fingers trembling until they made contact with his arm, my eyes struggling to pierce through the suffocating darkness. He inhaled deeply, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet, and held it, as if even breathing might give away our position. The dockboards groaned under the weight of the unseen intruder, each step a muffled promise of danger. They shifted and creaked, metal nails shrieking against the wood, as something malevolent crept closer to the shack with an agonizing, deliberate slowness. The sinister sounds halted at the front door, and the thumping of my frantic heartbeat filled my ears. In a futile attempt at readiness, I lowered my hand in silent desperation toward my belt, grasping at the empty holster. I had forgotten we had disarmed ourselves. Only the old man remained prepared to defend our lives. A frantic search for my weapon in the murky darkness would be meaningless before whatever horror lurked outside crashed in. I froze, my hand trembling, as time stretched into an agonizing eternity. A blood-curdling shriek pierced the darkness beyond the shack. The horror outside surged with terrifying swiftness down the dock and plunged into the water. The old man sprang into action, shadows flickering as dim lights reluctantly flickered to life. His reaction seemed oddly calm given the chaos that had just erupted. Leaning back, a curious smile played on his lips. "Well," he whispered, his voice tinged with disbelief, "that went better than expected." A soft, almost incredulous laugh escaped him. I turned to look at Burke, who was still stiff as a board. My attention turning back to the old man, I asked, "What in the 12 worlds was that?" The old man shuffled over to retrieve items from beneath a rickety makeshift bed. "Never mind use that," he muttered, handing each of us a tattered blanket. "It's the floors for yous two. We be talkin' into morn." He finished speaking as he hobbled to the other side of the dimly lit room, punching the lights out on the panel once again. Darkness swallowed the shack, leaving us with nothing but the rhythmic hum of insects to lull us into an uneasy sleep.